So, if I'm honest, you probably have one of the craziest underdog stories
Mhm.
I've ever heard about Oxbridge applications. Would you mind sharing your story to Oxford with our listeners?
Sure. So rewind back to sixth form. I had some quite sort of extreme family circumstances, moved halfway across the country, end of year 12, and I'd gotten predicted ABCC for my UCAS grades. I was very confident that I was going to do much better than that in my exams, and I did. That's why I'm here. But at the time, I thought I had no chance of getting into Oxford. And that was what I was told by the person at my old school who was helping with the admissions. She said again and again, "You've got no chance of getting in. We don't think you're going to get better than your predicted grades. Basically, you're wasting your application here." And I agreed with them. I thought, no chance of getting in, but I'll just take a gap year if I don't get in, apply with my real grades. Mm. Funnily enough, I got rejected from every university that I applied to other than Oxford. That was UCL. I think it took them 3 days to reject me. LSE, Bristol, and Bath. But I got into at that year, the most competitive course at Oxford to get into of economics and management. Um, and that was largely off the back of my entrance exam performance on the TSA Section 1, because we set the entrance exam before we get the interview invitations. And so I've talked to the people who are involved with my admissions at the college, and they said that basically they saw that because I did well enough on the entrance exam, they could see that there was something clearly wrong with my predicted grades and basically overlooked them. Because if the predicted grades were accurate and I wasn't going to meet the entrance requirements, I wasn't going to get in anyway. I needed A star AA to get into the course. And so I got invited to the interview. The interview went well, got in, got the place, was very surprised, changed my entire gap year plans, and, came and did my degree, just finished it now. Um, but yeah, it was very, very surprising to me and everyone in the school and everyone who I've talked to about it. But now that I know basically how important the entrance exam is for sort of overriding bad UCAS grades before applying, it makes a lot more sense. And I probably should have spent more time revising for the entrance exam in hindsight because I had no idea. But yeah, here I am.
Yeah, here you are at the top most competitive course at Oxford. I think it's a really amazing story. And I'd like to try and draw some sort of universal principle from your story. I think there'll be a lot of students who are watching this who might have shallower predicted grades. Their grades aren't as high as they think they are. Maybe their GCSE performance isn't as strong as the ideal Oxbridge candidate. So, what would you advise someone who was in a similar position to you, who maybe lacked that self confidence and self belief, but gave it a shot anyway?
I'd say that it depends specifically what course you're applying to, because some courses you have at Oxford and Cambridge, you have your entrance exam, the important ones before you get the interview sort of rejections or admissions. For economics and management, with my course specifically, it's 5% per year get in, and 20% are interviewed. So it's 1 in 5 to get to the interview, 1 in 4 after the interview to get the offer. Once you're at the interview stage, you've pretty much passed the big hurdles of getting there, and it's selection based on how well it happened, how well you do in the interview at that point. Um, so getting to the interview is sort of the most important point if you're concerned about your UCAS predicted grades, or how well you've done at GCSEs, say. Um, Naturally, if you don't have an entrance exam before the interview stage, it could provide a little bit of an issue there. And you might consider, say, taking a gap year applying with your actual grades. But if you have an entrance exam beforehand, the advice is pretty much do what you can to get the real grades that you think you can get. And to practice up on the entrance exam, do lots of past papers, at least for the TSA. Doing past papers is one of the best ways to revise it. Different entrance exams have different strategies. But for your A levels, your A level grades are going to be a large determinant of if you actually hit the offer, provided you've done well enough on the entrance exam, done well enough on the interview. Um, Past papers is my strongest piece of advice, but close to the time you'll actually do it. What I always advise students I've tutored and what I did myself was to look through the specs, look through the textbooks way ahead of time, be working through it throughout the year at school to do Practice questions all the way along as you go. And in the last 3 to 4 months before your actual exams, do every single past paper, save for the last one or two. You can repeat them again and again because they do similar topics, similar kind of questions. You can identify what you're weak at. And very close to the exam, then you sit the last couple of years worth of entrance exams or past papers, depending on which you're revising for. Um, Basically, you know, get it done, try and get the grades. Entrance exam is very important for it. And you can always take a gap year and apply again. But I personally advise, yeah, basically all that. Sorry, a little bit scatterbrained, but
No, not at all. I think it's really interesting how people might overlook the importance of entrance exams in that you might have a flawless student who has like a clean set of GCSEs, a clean set of A level predicted grades, but flops the entrance exam. But in their head, they might think, oh, it's fine because I've got this cushion or this safety net of good grades, which is certainly the case. But a lot of these entrance exams are pretty deterministic and they do act as your foot in the door for you getting an interview and ultimately getting a place. And that's certainly something that's taken into consideration. Now, I want to rewind a little bit. Sorry, did you have something else to add on
yeah,
that before I
yeah.
did?
I felt like my explanation was a little bit here and there. I think I could make a little bit more sense, just sort of explaining a broad overview of what they look for first and why the entrance
Please
exam
do.
matters so much for it. Because from everything that I've seen, my experience, people I've talked to, there's basically three things that universities and particularly Oxford and Cambridge look for to make sure they're admitting somebody that's going to do well at university. They want to know, firstly, that you're smart enough. That's where the A level grades come in. That's where the grade requirements come in. But pretty much everyone at Oxford and Cambridge are already getting A's and A stars. And so they need a new way to differentiate people. And that's where the entrance exam comes in. That's why lots of other unis don't have entrance exams, but they're such a big thing for Oxford and Cambridge and other top institutions. Um, so they sort of substitute it for the A level grades in part. Um, Naturally, they also want to know that you're interested in the subject. That's mainly where the personal statement came in, and these years the UCAS scaffolding questions. And they also want to know that you can be taught well, which is mainly where the interview comes in, where it's structured kind of like a tutorial. They'll often have some kind of tricky or trick question, see how you react and interact with a different way of looking at it or with being proven wrong. They basically want to see how you'll do at uni because people often get burnt out. It's not just about being smart, it's about being interested in the subject and it's about having a good attitude to learning. So it's not just the grades, but I think that might make a little more sense what I was saying before.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice summary because it just goes to show that it's not all about grades. It's about your intellectual curiosity and your passion for the subject. So, given that we ventured onto that topic, I think what would be really helpful is if you could walk our listeners through your interview experience and if you could draw a general set of observations about what they look for in an economics and management interview.
So we had two separate interviews. There was an economics side and a management side. They were quite different. So I had the economics one first, and there were little questions, getting to know me, pleasantries, that kind of stuff. With the personal statement that I had, they asked, I can't remember the exact questions, a couple of questions about things that I'd mentioned, because quite often they want to check that you actually, say, have read the book that you're talking about or are interested in the thing you've mentioned, because in theory, anybody could have written it for you. It's meant to be personal. It's a personal statement. So they often look to verify it. It can also be a good topic for conversations. That was the first thing from the economic side of the interview. What's very common also is they'll have a specific problem that they will lay out. You'll often want to have, say, a piece of paper or a whiteboard with you. That you walk through the problem. I didn't know this at the time, but it was kind of a trick question that I was going through, and it was basically a traffic management question, and they led me to an answer that was completely wrong. And then confidently gave the answer, and they're like, "But what about this thing?" And I was like, uh, okay, yeah, that was wrong. Sorry, let me just, relook through it. Came to a different answer, had a conversation about why the answer was unintuitive, broader implications, just sort of having a little conversation about it. But that I think is the most key point during the interview process is how you sort of react to being proven wrong about something, because you can't just go into uni with, especially in economics, with completely set ideas and sort of descriptions of how things work in the real world, because you're going to university to learn these things. And naturally, you can have some preconceived ideas about economics, say politics, all these different kind of things. But you do have to be willing and ready to learn and adapt, because that's kind of the entire point of university. That, I think, kind of describes the economic side of the interview. For management, it was very different. It was a lot more personal, because pretty much nobody who's applying to economics and management has officially studied management beforehand. It's not something you can really, study at GCSE, A levels, at least as far as I know. It wasn't available at my school. I've never heard of anyone being able to do it. Maybe some places internationally. But they're basically expecting you to have no knowledge. And so they asked me quite a few, questions. Favorite film? What do you think about this thingy? Basically getting to know me, see what I'm like as a person, see if I'm the kind of person they would like to teach. Because the people who are doing the interviews are often the people who are actually going to be working with you as a tutor. So it's basically seeing, is this guy nice? Would I want to teach lessons with them? But they also asked me, it's kind of like the trick question thing before. It wasn't a trick question or anything, though. They just asked me, what do I think management is? What does it mean to me? And I had a moment where I was like, uh, just can you give me 2 seconds, and had a little think about it, gave my idea, my definition. Then they gave their definition, which was, the accurate, true definition of management. And all I could say was, yeah, sounds like a better definition, than mine. Cool. Thanks, guys. But that's kind of a key point in the interview. They're wanting to see how you react to being put on the spot and, say, being, I guess, in hot water or proven wrong about something or seeing disagreement, because that's part of university. I think that's the key thing they look to test in interviews. That was kind of my experience of it.
I think I've got 2 questions from what you just described there. Number one, it sounds like there is a little bit of a black hole of knowledge in terms of what a student should be required to know for management. So would you say that it's advisable for a student to read around management theories and basically do a mini MBA before they get to university? Will that give them an edge, or will the admissions tutors take that differently? What's your perspective on that?
I'd say that having basically no knowledge on management type things, it's not that having no knowledge would be a big negative. It's that having an understanding, having a curiosity, as you were saying before, intellectual curiosity, that could be a big plus. So it's not like you have to do it. I, for one, had basically no idea what management was. I'd had a little, read around. I wasn't expecting to get an offer in the first place, and it didn't bar me from getting in. And it's quite similar for lots of people who applied. But if you're applying, say, to economics and management, you can structure your knowledge and UCAS scaffolding questions to just the economics part and pretty much be fine. But naturally, it's less risky to go for both. In terms of specific content that you could look into on the management side that could be used for the whole application process, my advice is always to go for what interests you. But what I think is most interesting and easy to learn and easy to talk about and is relevant to the course. Personally, I think Barney's resource-based view, Porter's 5 forces, those are pretty common ones. I guess the efficient market hypothesis, which is more on the financy side of management. The first 2 being strategic management, the efficient market hypothesis being finance. Naturally, there are tons and tons more different examples that I could give, from tech ops to marketing, etc., etc. But find anything that interests you. They're not looking for you to be an expert. They're looking for you to be interested to learn more and be passionate about something. So it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but genuinely, your interest in whatever you're talking about is more important than your expertise in the application.
And just for the benefit of our listeners, how would you define management?
How would I define management now? It's multifaceted. I would say that it's sort of like the process of organizing things or people to a desired end. That's kind of how I describe it. Because management isn't just something specific to, you've got this team, you're managing these people. The systems thinking is often a large part of management. It's about the underlying systems of interactions between people, agents, resources that you have. It can be applied into politics, into political systems, say. It can be applied to teams, which is the typical thing that people think of when they think of management is, oh, I'm managing a team, I'm managing these people. It can be managing cats, dogs, supply chains, etc., etc. It sort of gets at something a little more fundamental in reality about the interactions between different processes. I think that it works pretty well with economics because now I know this is the specific definition of economics. I may get the wording a little bit wrong, but that it's the study of how people interact with things of value, that it's not specific to money. It's almost always in the context of money because money is our sort of our proxy for value. We created money to sort of be a substitute for value, so we can trade things between each other. Um, but it applies outside of money, say in contexts like game theory, where it can sometimes be used to describe evolutionary patterns. It sort of gets at something fundamental. It's not just about money and central bank interest rates and budget maximization and all of those kinds of things. I think it's quite interesting in that sense, and you know they sort of go hand in hand.
Yeah, I find that definition quite interesting, how systems are organized to meet a certain goal or objective. So I studied at business school in my fourth year at Cambridge and did a lot of the topics that you might have done in your first year, organizational behavior, operational management, marketing, those sorts of things. The one thing I always really struggled with at business school was discerning the extent to which theory is useful in practice. And what I often found and became frustrated over was how disconnected some of the theories that people were postulating in the business school was from economic physical reality. And the question I have for you is, you've obviously had a stint at entrepreneurship. You've got lots of different things going on outside student studies. To what extent would you say that what you have learned at Oxford studying management is applicable to what you've done in practice?
So I'd say that it kind of goes back to, I think, a common critique of university that people have, which I personally disagree with. But firstly, the critique is, we learn all of these theories and this doesn't work in practice. It doesn't work out like this. This isn't how the real world works because we have all of these assumptions that don't hold. Now, I very, very much agree with that. And in economics, you have a model, you make an argument, you say, assume, say, perfect information, perfect rationality, all these kind of things. Lots of people in policymaking and in politics use models like that to make certain arguments, and I think that's quite wrong. But so long as you're treating it with respect and essentially saying, within this context, with these assumptions, this works, I think everything's fine if you do that. It's more about giving you the language and the understanding of the fundamental systems rather than giving you prescriptions. It's sort of like you can have a model, say, for perfect competition in economics, or you can have a supply and demand graph. The supply and demand graph, you're never actually going to have a perfect straight line of supply or demand. It could wiggle around, it could come back down, it could do loads of crazy things. The point of that graph, the very first graph you learn in economics, isn't to say this is what all markets look like. It's to make the point of, if you increase the supply, you have this expected change in the price and quantity because of these things. It gives you sort of the tools and the language and methods to analyze real world things. So sure, in the management side, from technology and operations management, say from an organizational behavior and analysis type thing, you read loads of theories and it's hard to apply them to specific scenarios. It's mostly about getting you comfortable thinking about the kind of issues that you'll deal with in the real world and being able to tackle them, because you may not be able to fit the model to reality, but if you have a model to be thinking about and to be basing your own actions on, you may be able to create your own little, say, side model, side way of being. I think that's mainly the point of university. It's not to tell you all the right ways to do things. It's to help you learn how to do things and learn what's out there.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, of course, studying economics and the theoretical models that underpin it give you a conceptual framework to function in the world. Clearly, we need some a priori knowledge to actually go out into the world and live it. And what you were saying actually reminded me of just a funny moment from school. Me and my mate used to have this running joke in economics. You know, when you study market failure in economics and you've got to draw out that little triangle that
Deadweight
captures the
welfare law.
market failure,
Yeah.
the deadweight welfare loss, exactly. Me and my friend used to joke, like, there's a meeting going on in the Houses of Parliament where the Prime Minister's got a ruler and he's measuring, oh, we can't have this much deadweight welfare loss because it's going to affect the north of England.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, clearly that's not what happens. People just say things in the House of Commons. And obviously there's clearly a lot of economic analysis that underpins it. But like you said, it's difficult to retrofit a model onto reality because the dynamics between the two are very complex. But that's a more technical discussion for another day. So going back then to the actual course, economics and management, the second question I had about 10 minutes ago was, I was in a school giving a presentation a couple of weeks ago, and one of the girls in the audience asked, what should she do to prepare for economics and management if she didn't study economics at A level? And as far as I'm aware, you can apply for the subject without having studied economics or management. So what would you advise a student in that situation?
My personal advice would be, so there's your entrance exam, there's your scaffolding questions, and there's your interview. Those are the three things that you target with your application. The first stage that you do is answering the UCAS scaffolding questions. To do those, you need to have stuff to talk about, basically. To have stuff to talk about, you need to know what interests you about economics. So the answer is kind of different depending on how much you know about economics, whether you have specific topics that you find really interesting or not. The stage one, if not, you don't know anything about economics or management and you're looking to apply, I would say Google things, look at YouTube channels. Economics Explained is quite a good one. There's some Kurzgesagt videos. There's a bunch of different channels. You can just look at what's going on in economics, say politics. Find what interests you first. The most common topics I find that people find very interesting, that I find interesting myself, you firstly have behavioral economics, where it's basically a mixture of economics and psychology. The big book that I'd always recommend people to read from that is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman and Amon Tversky. I think it was 2012, won them the Nobel Prize. It's quite accessible, is a very good read, a good book. You can, look it up, see stuff around that. Lots of other behavioral economics books that are very good and interesting that people can read and look through. And I think that developmental economics is the next big thing that people find very interesting, where there's massive global inequality. Personally, I think the most interesting stat from it is it currently costs around £4,000 to be able to save somebody's life given to medical interventions in lots of the developing countries, say to malaria nets, vitamin supplements, to vaccinations and water sanitation. Kind of makes your brain explode when you realize £4,000 can save someone's life in, going to malaria nets. In the UK, the NHS, it costs about, I believe, £1 million of money spent to save someone's life. And so in theory, we're spending over 200 times as much money to save someone's life in the UK as we might say to Burundi or Malawi. There's lots of other interesting stuff on it. I think it's a generally interesting topic. Beyond all that, you can find what interests you, read about it, be able to have a conversation about it. You'll be great for your personal statement, your UCAS scaffolding questions. And then for the entrance exam, depends on the entrance exam. For Oxford Economics and Management, TSA Section 1, it's basically like a glorified IQ test. There's not so much you can do to revise for it specifically compared to other entrance exams, but maybe doing a basic formal logic course can be helpful because their logical argument, it's if you have this and this, then what is the outcome? It can sort of give you a framework to analyze it, but mainly it's becoming comfortable with the test. So my advice would be do lots of past papers, but start off by just reading through an old paper. Every single question, you look at it, read the question, read the answer, figure out why they connect, why that answer is right. Do that for a couple of them, then do a few of them yourself under timed conditions, mark them, basically practice like that until you come very close to actually sitting it, and then sit a couple under complete timed conditions, strict, make them the most recent couple, and if you get to the interview stage, do interview prep. Have practice interviews. There's lots of resources available to find, old interview questions. Do it with a friend. Do it with, family member, teacher, etc., etc. and I guess maybe re-listen back to me describing what to expect in the interviews. And yeah, I think it'd be set.
Cool. Very helpful pieces of advice there. So you've got a pretty amazing track record of helping people win places at Oxford. I think your success rate is now something like triple the actual rate at Oxbridge, which is fantastic. So given that you're obviously going into teaching and you have been teaching and coaching students for a number of years, what would you say are the set of common traits that unite successful applicants to these universities?
In terms of traits, I would say it's in large part what the universities look for specifically that we've already described of the intellectual curiosity and competence. There's one specific thing that I think makes a massive difference to me, which is it's not a specific trait. It's sort of like a litmus test. It's how comfortable are they talking about the subject? Because anybody in theory could say, I could write about why I think chemistry or physics is interesting, and give me some time and some books. I can write why it's objectively interesting. I can say, chemistry, you've got all these chemicals, you can do, experiments, you can study atoms, and oh, this is really cool. But I'm not actually interested in chemistry. I couldn't hold a conversation about it. I am interested in economics and I could talk about it for a long time. The conversation could go a million different ways and I'd still be comfortable talking about it because I'm interested in it and I've been thinking about it. That's the big difference I see between applicants. People who are comfortable having a conversation about a topic because they think about it and they read about it, and they're actually interested in it. Those are the ones that are set up to do really well. And that's also what the university is trying to test for with the application process. If you wouldn't be comfortable having a conversation about a given subject, you might be interested in another subject, maybe think about other options, or learn more, figure out what interests you about it, do some introspection, read around, figure more stuff out. But yeah, specific traits, not too sure, but specific, I guess, I'm not sure what you'd call it, a trait,
It's
an
almost like
action,
a behavior. It's like
behavior.
a behavior, really, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I'd focus on the behaviors to be confident in your subject more so than specific traits, because there's a whole range of personality traits and attributes across everyone at Oxford.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's very unrealistic to think and to assume that you need a specific trait to get in. But as you mentioned, it's more an overarching system slash behavior around what creates successful applicants. And as you mentioned, it's intellectual curiosity, but it's also more fundamentally that authentic interest in the subject that can't be faked.
Hmm.
And that's something that's really, truly, genuinely individual to you. And I would push back on that in some sense, not in a wholesale sense, because obviously passion is what gets people into university. But I would say it's very difficult for a 17-year-old to talk about their interests eloquently, articulately, and in a way that genuinely conveys the passion. For example, in my case, when I applied to geography, I was interested in geography. I like volcanoes, I like sustainable development, all that stuff. But I wasn't sufficiently well developed to get my points across confidently in an interview setting. And so, although in my head and in my mind, I felt like I had this passion for the subject, I couldn't articulate it. And I guess that's where your advice of practicing interviews comes in, because a big trait of successful applicants, or at least something that the applicants do very well with if they get places, is thinking out loud. It's doing things like this. It's talking through your thoughts and getting them across clearly. So yeah, I completely agree with you, but I think it's tough. It's really hard for students nowadays to get across that passion. So would you advise, how would you advise that they get around that? I
So
don't know if you agree with me there.
yeah, I do. This is something I always found it, I think, easier than most people, and I helped a lot of friends with their applications. I found that when people would be talking about, you know, I'm interested in the subject because of this thing, there's often reasons why it's objectively interesting and cool, and those are good reasons why you're interested in it. But the stuff that everybody Sort of like the gold dust, the gold nugget in a personal statement or in a conversation is something that's specific to you, something that's personal to you. It could be, I care about this issue. I have this thing, that I learned about. I did this event. I have this, childhood dream or memory. And that is why I'm interested in the subject. I have this thing that's unique to me. It connects to the subject in this way. And that's why I think it's cool. When it's something personal, people can almost always talk about themselves for days and feel a lot more comfortable because there's tons of unknowns, say about developmental economics or about strategic management or anything. But when it comes to you, why you're interested in it, as long as it's about you, you can be very confident in talking and explaining, your rationale and your reasons. I'd encourage people to not just think about it, but talk about it because that's one of the best ways sort of for introspection. You can think in your own head, but talking and describing your interests to people that you know in your real life, or if you don't want to do that, even just journaling, writing down, or just get a piece of paper, write it down, figure yourself out, because there is a reason why you're interested in it, and you should be able to describe it sort of from a personal lens. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, it's such an important piece of advice because I think you should never assume that the interviewers will be able to see your passion. Because although you think the passion is inside of you, unless you find a way to express that verbally and through your body language, it's very difficult to get across something internal to something external. So, yeah, great piece of advice there. Now, I want to wrap up with a more general piece of advice for our listeners. If you were to go back into your 17-year-old shoes, the underdog shoes, who believed that they stood no chance of getting into university, given that their teachers were telling them all sorts of things, what advice would you give your 17-year-old self?
Naturally, in hindsight, I would say screw what they thought. They're obviously don't know what they're talking about. But that's not always the case, and they did have a point. It was kind of an information gap when I was applying because I didn't really understand how the application process properly worked for Oxford, what they looked for. I didn't know how important the entrance exam was. In fact, it's a bit funny considering I got in, but I spent I think 2 hours revising the night before the entrance exam. Definitely, I would have spent a long time, a lot of time longer revising for it. But I'd say I'd advise myself to look at more resources, look things up on YouTube. I'd say get a consultation with a tutor because it genuinely makes a massive difference. And even if it's a singular 1 hour session, um, I can explain. I mean, I guess it's been what, half an hour in a podcast, and we've already touched on pretty much every part of actually every part of the application process for economics and management about what you should do to prepare for applying, what they look for, all of this information. It's out there, but most people don't know that it's out there. My advice would be, have a look back, Google things, do your prep. I don't know, pretty much do what you did, but get more information.
I think that's a succinct piece of advice. Search for the information because it's always out there and there's always someone that's willing to help. So, on that note, I will wrap things up. Thank you very much for
Cool.
your time. It's been great to catch up.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.